It is you're not allowed to carry anything, no matter how important it is. In case of a person who is chas v'shalom a cripple, needs a cane to walk with him, or who uses crutches. What about these crutches or cane? Are they considered carrying, or are they considered a garment, or are they considered part of it? Then is that depends upon the cripple how badly he needs this cane, this crutch to support. If it is impossible for him to walk without a cane, he's allowed to use that cane because this serves as a leg for him. So it is permissible for a cripple or for a person who limps to use a cane if it's vitally necessary to walk with. But if he needs a cane only to help him to make things easier, to simplify his walk, that he could with difficulty get along without the cane, that cane is considered carrying. The same thing applies to an elderly person. It's some old men who use canes. Some use it for help to make it easier to walk with, as a support, a means of support. Some actually use it only for show, because it's fine looking. In the case of an elderly man too, if he cannot walk without the support of the cane, that much necessary for him is allowed to take it out of Shabbos. He could get along without it, even with difficulty, he's not allowed to. Now, if it's a question of using it only for the sake of show itself, where it makes him look more genteel, the Gentile, then even in case where there is an Eidah, even when there's an Eidah, still there's a machlekes whether he's allowed to use this cane. And it's considered a tachshit, an ornament for him, or not. According to the Chayyadam of Aharon, chavruta, they say is the first thing, there's a Yehuda, what the rabbi who says that it's usher for that they say it's permissible for a zaken, an elderly person to carry a cane, whether it is because that's like a passion. But the chavruta passes like the Magen Avraham Chayyadam, that it is considered a degrading, disrespectful to the Shabbos to walk with a cane, even where there is a tachshit, and even where there is an Eidah, because it's not considered a tachshit, it's a weekday item. This is because the Big Yosef, if he does all, asking that it's considered that it's a use of the Shabbos. So that the Halacha l'maisa, the person should avoid it. Just as we said, there are certain things that are not fit the cloud for Shabbos, or even for the weekdays. But the weekday, this is the need of a weekday to carry a cane, or a stick to walk with. But not on Shabbos. Same thing too. We stress once more that for a man to wear a wristwatch on Shabbos, surely should be avoided. Not to wear a wristwatch on Shabbos, and not to wear a ring on Shabbos, or even during the week if possible. Avoid that because it's a matter of just showing off jewelry which is not fit for a man, the chalal. The person should learn to be humble, not to wear that kind of jewelry. In the case of a chas v'shalom, a blind person who uses a cane to walk with, then it is forbidden for that blind person to use this cane on Shabbos, because it does nothing for his steps. It does not help him to walk. As long as his legs are healthy, then he's not allowed to use a cane. He could use someone else to guide him, a person to guide him, not to use this cane. In the case of a person who wears, as a shown again, leg irons, prisoner, then it is permissible for the person to use these, to go out with these on Shabbos, if the warden allows him, because of the fact that this is part of his garb. They wouldn't allow him to remove it. He's allowed to walk out with leg irons on Shabbos, these shilas, all these shilas should belong to the Goyim, or they're the ones that need this. We should be zeichet to complete perfect health, and a complete perfect kiyum, and Torah mitzvahs, and a complete Teshuva b'yas k'atzayim. Okay, Shabbos, something which is very important, very So it's a big problem with Shabbos is if a person has a cut or a wound. He puts on a bandage or this pad. This pad is soaked with a medication, any kind of medicine on this pad, this bandage. Now this is permitted to be worn, be carried on Shabbos. However, if this pad is removed for any reason, it falls off, or you move it for a second for anything at all, do not put it back on again, because you're not allowed to apply any kind of medication on Shabbos unless it's an emergency. A regular bandage itself, Band-Aid, even the kiruv Band-Aid, for example, is taken off, you have to put on, and surely you cannot put on a new bandage with medicine on it. If the bandage is only made to avoid hurting or scratching the wound, then it is permissible to put it on in exchange even on Shabbos, or to take it off and replace it again. And that is only if the bandage is something that's of no value. If it's made of a cloth that you need, will not be discarding, that cannot be worn on Shabbos because that is considered Halacha, that it's considered carrying. It must be either a gauze, bandage, Band-Aid, or even a rag which you're going to discard after you use it, not something which is of value. Again, a strong reminder about the issue of coloring. If there is blood, any blood at all, using a kerchief, a handkerchief, none of that is osur on Shabbos. Again, unless it's an emergency, the person is bleeding to death, that's for sure. In a regular case, normal case, you cannot use a handkerchief to cover this and to stem the flow of the blood, because this is coloring on Shabbos. You have to use something which is going to be thrown away, which means it's just becoming dirty, that's it. In case of emergency where a person has nothing else, so of course a person could then resolve firmly in his mind that this handkerchief I'm going to throw away, it has no value to me, I don't need it, in fact I can't wait to get rid of it, and so on. Difficult item because it must be an honest thought. But then it's considered making it dirty, so it's not really severe. In case of an emergency, of course, where the person must stem the flow of blood, then there's no question. It's done or nefesh. It is missing the Halacha Shabbos for emergency. And the Bible says that it's a very sad item. We heard that a law who lived close to 300 years ago still writes that a Jew is a Jew, different countries, they force the Jew to realize the fact that he's a Jew is different. Well, they compel the Jews to wear a yellow patch. This is sewn onto the garment. You see that it's not something that was recently evolved. It's something that was in the past too. Hundreds of years ago they had these yellow patches with the word Jew written on it. The language that could be. The Jew is allowed to wear this patch, to go out with it on Shabbos. Of course, it is custom to wear it during the week too. So that's why it's considered a beged, part of the beged, it's brought to the beged, and it is permissible during the week. That's for sure where it was necessary. It never can be necessary. As you come with the gleam, should wear the yellow garments under the ground. So the problem with carrying a handkerchief on Shabbos, for those who needed to have a cold or so, nowadays of course you have tissues so you can move it where you're going or find ones where you're going. But where let's say it's necessary for a person to have a handkerchief with him, the question is, well, how are you allowed to, what manner may a person take a handkerchief with him? There's only one really legal way to do that, and that is by removing the belt. Moving a belt and using this with the loops of the pants or top of it, but no other belt, and to use this two handkerchiefs together, tie them securely before Shabbos, not on Shabbos, and make this into a regular belt. If a person already has a belt, you cannot use handkerchiefs as a belt. You cannot use another belt as a belt because a person cannot wear two belts. That's why a garter on Shabbos is a big shadow. It's worn underneath a jacket. There's one other jacket to use that as a regular garter. But you cannot use two belts, and therefore the only really legal way to wear a handkerchief is as a belt. It's the only belt you have. The other asks that it's permissible to wear it around the neck as a scarf. That is only if it's a regular milbush. It's more than a scarf, and not with the ends hanging. You can't have the two ends hanging down because then it's not really being worn as a garment. Some would say, or many people say, you see that certain people in Yerushalmi wear it right around the neck, just let it dangle there. And the biggest setting where you see that, the answer is dummy, talking about a place where there's an Erev. It's not a Shasarab there. An Erev, you carry your pocket handkerchief, so he carries it around his neck loosely. At least, around the neck loosely is not considered Tzah in the full sense. The weaker sense of Tzah, but when you kosher from the street, at least not really carrying a pocket. So, the other one is that much more strict, though it's an Erev. Our custom is to accept the Erev in Yerushalmi. But in a regular street, always, the handkerchief cannot be worn around the neck unless it's worn as a mamush, a scarf, a beggar than other. When we carry the mitzvah Shabbos, B'Shleimus, it's a scholar Kula, and Rabbi Syrian Jewish. Look at Shabbos, Nida Yitzhak. Discussing the thing of wearing. The item is a malbush, it's a garment, you're allowed to hang it outside. If it is not, it's a mid, it's a tachshit, ornament. Then we said for women it's permissible, for men it's questionable. Now, a person wears two garments, two coats, two jackets, two pairs of pants, one on top of the other. It is permissible even if it's not necessary. Of course, and it's possible that in the wintertime he would do so too. Very cold weather he would do so. So it's a case where it's normal to wear two garments one on top of the other. Therefore, if he has a different reason for it, he's allowed to wear it outside. This is true in the case of two hats also. You don't wear two hats. Unless permissible if it is a normal procedure. For instance, a hat on top of a yarmulke would not be permissible for a person who never wears his yarmulke under his hat. If he does so during the week, he's allowed to do so on Shabbos. If he never does it, he cannot do this on Shabbos either. One thing is not permissible, that is two belts, one on top of the other. It's not allowed. A belt is made to serve a purpose. You cannot wear a girdle on top of a belt on Shabbos. It must be on top of a garment. The wearing of gloves is a very serious question. And most of the posek asur gloves because the person can forget to remove a glove while walking in the street, to touch something, hold something, carry the glove in his other hand. Therefore, it is definitely awesome. On Shabbos, the wearing of a glove is awesome. The wearing of the muff, we don't have it nowadays, they used to have a muff, where you put both hands into a single warm item. And there, if you take your hand out of the one, you still have it on the other hand automatically. That might be permissible, but it's unfortunately we don't have it today, so we haven't got that problem. Because even then it's questionable. It's better not to wear any of these items on Shabbos. Another thing which is people are not aware of sometimes, should be aware of, is usually a coat or a jacket comes with a hook with a little band on top to hang it up on a hook. If that band breaks, after a while it gets worn, you hang it up on until it breaks, you have it hanging from one side, then that is considered carrying if that piece of string is not buttoned. It means it becomes void doesn't count at all compared to the importance of the Yom. So it is judged this way. If the person considers it important enough, and he's going to see that it's torn on Shabbos, he keeps in mind, makes a mental note that he's going to ask his wife to sew it up after Shabbos, and of course he wants that back up, then it is forbidden to carry on Shabbos. You find that the jacket has that torn, you cannot wear that jacket on Shabbos, a jacket or coat, if there is an intention, an honest intention of replacing it or repairing it. Especially if that is a metal hook, so a chain on top, then that is a double chashuv to be worthwhile. When you want a metal chain hanging, so in most cases, the vast majority of cases, the person would have a mind to repair it. Then, surely that cannot be worn on Shabbos. It can only be worn if the person honestly and sincerely never intends to repair that. It doesn't bother him at all. Then it becomes a void, meaningless. He's allowed to wear that item on Shabbos. Zecher to kiruv mitzvahs b'shleimus. Yes, but it's a Menachem Shabbos in Arizal. There are some poskim who say that it is forbidden to wear a hat with a wide brim. A wide brim hat is also to wear because this constitutes an idol, a tent. Taking a tent so that this putting it on means you are creating a tent, though it has no size. It usually has size too. Still, they say it's also inadvisable. The fact is that in the Chaim, in Arizal too says it's better not to wear a hat with a wide brim. The brim of a tepach, it's about 4 inches wide. A 4-inch brim is not too common, but that type of brim, which of course we have, Yerushalmi has some of those wider hats, wide brim hats, where this shadow comes up. However, the majority of places when they go, they say that since there's no intention here of oil, protecting the sun, it's really for the sake of the mitzvah of kisei hareish, Yerushalmi, and therefore it is permissible, and that is the big item. However, because of this, there are some people, there are some people who avoid putting a talus over the head, because this too creates an oil. In fact, you have an oil on top and the sides. They avoid wearing a talus over the head on Shabbos. However, the Master Shekel says that there's no tam or reach to this halacha, because very contrary, it's a major mitzvah for a person to wear the talus to dafka over the head. The real kosher b'tahid is that a person should put the talus on his head for the entire davening. There are some people who put the talus over their just for Shmoneh Esrei alone, which at least is good, better than those who stand with a bare head during Shmoneh Esrei. Better, the best thing is to give an aura, of Yerushalmi during davening, and wear the talus over the head the entire time. It's the real mitzvah of talus, and especially on Shabbos night. Person Chas v'Shalom finds tefillin out in the street, wood someplace on Shabbos. Doesn't really need tefillin lying there, so he's allowed to put on the tefillin on Shabbos, wear it as a malbish. Put on a pair of tefillin on Shabbos, go into the house, come back, put on another pair and so forth. So find a whole package of many pairs of tefillin. Put them on pair by pair and wear it in. Of course, it is not considered muktzah, it's considered a malbish. If Rav of Breslov finds the Sefer Torah lying, the question of the zoya for the Sefer Torah, he is permitted to take the Sefer Torah, unwind it, and wrap it around his body, put a coat on the top of it, and wear this into the house. For the sake of the cover of the Sefer Torah is permissible. You never have to see this, because in those days there were times when the Goyim, the Rosenfeld, stole these by R Nosson, whereas on Shabbos they had to know exactly what to do with it. In case a woman finds a pair of tefillin or a talus, she cannot wear this as a man would. A woman has no din or malbush at all. Even though the Gemara says there were some exceptional women, Michal Bas Shol, Yedem and Mitai's wife, who wore talus tefillin, But even in the latter days, the Talmidim of Baal Shem Tov, one of them had a wife who was very strict in wearing a talis, tutus. Today there are certain they also attempt this. But they did say that the Isa Midaraisa for a woman to wear a talis and tefillin on Shabbos. This din of wearing talis and tefillin on Shabbos, wearing tefillin inside on Shabbos, only men. We should be zechet to feel margish, Hasidic kedusha, av tashmisha kedusha, be mishemshe kedusha ourselves. Ki mitzvahs b'shleimus, then I see the kedusha that we made on it. On Shabbos, if a person is walking in the street on Shabbos and it's raining, the sati geshnecha be'iton, it's supposed to rain if it comes on Shabbos Friday night. You're not supposed to be walking in the street. The person goes out for a walk after eating and it starts to rain. He becomes heavily soaked, completely soaked. His clothes are soaked through. You're allowed to keep walking with it from Shaila and Svita. Svita means you're not allowed to squeeze out any kind of a cloth and there's water in it. Squeeze out a sponge or anything like that, or Shaila is for the squeeze out water because the Shaila is so big one. Other things involve squeezing out anything which has water is possible. Here, if he walks with these clothes, walking in the pressure of the clothes will squeeze out the water. And it's permissible because in this case there is no kavod at all for it. And it's normal to walk with clothes that are wet, normal to certain case to rain. However, to his home, he's not allowed to spread out these clothes to dry. Because if he does, there is an Isser minus iron. And the sign means that people will think that he washed them on Shabbos. Of course, there is that possibility of the person mistaken. This possible sin. The sign means the person would think of the impression that sin was done, or that it's admissible to do this act. Therefore, it is possible to spread them out to dry. That's the Isa minus iron, which is the Aharon. Isa the Isa spread it out to dry, where on something which is hot, like a hot radiator, or it's in an oven. In an oven, where it dries there, then it is considered Isa the Isa because drying something in the fire is also Nisha Malabe, which contains Yavasha. It's cooking. Cooking, when you want to dry something, purify something, you cook it also. It doesn't mean food necessarily. So therefore, this is also nice to put the clothes up against the fire to dry. Now, about the Isa Madas Ayin, if it is an item where there is no question about it, they did not wash it on Shabbos, then it's permissible because there's no Madas Ayin involved. For instance, we see diapers hanging. If they see diapers hanging, then they know that these diapers were not washed on Shabbos because they are not clean. So where it's obvious that it hasn't been washed on Shabbos, they're allowed to have the items hung up. As far as the din of Madas Ayin is concerned, the Gemara says, Halacha means that Rav said that the thing, this is in general, all cases, the thing has a decent Madas Ayin, then it's also not just what people would see. Even if it's done privately, in a closed room, in a cellar, on a desert island, it is still forbidden to do because Madas Ayin is still found. Even though there's no Madas Ayin possible here, of course, the need of Madas Ayin exists publicly, privately too, the same thing remains. You cannot commit this act in private. Now this thing, in cases China told, I'm not going to have no passage this way too. We're going to make it. The Shulchan has that if the Isa, what is Madas Ayin? The person committed a sin on Shabbos. But if the Madas Ayin is because of an Isa the Isa, and we think the person committed a major sin on Shabbos, then it's also to do this act even in a hidden place, private hidden place. And if what they will suspect is they committed an act of Aharon on Shabbos, then of course it's Madas Ayin. They cannot do it publicly. privately he's allowed to do it. The Easter of Chadrei Chadorim, doing something which has not a sign, that's a private, nobody could see. That Easter is only when the suspicion would be an Easter Deraisa. Whereas Easter Admonon, when it's admissible to do it, then he's not bound by the fact that they might have thought that he's not coming, they're not thought of an Easter involved. One final item, a person that goes swimming is not allowed to walk 4 amas away from the edge of the river, because that is considered carrying water on him, and it's considered carrying. So there's a question of carrying that. He cannot walk away. He has to dry himself right at the edge of the river itself. And if the outside itself is shifted up, let's say like a beach, it's much worse because the beach here was 1,000 people. Then it's much worse because then you cannot carry less than 4 amas either. You cannot step outside of the water onto the shore. You've got to dry yourself while still in the water, which is a very difficult situation. Unless, of course, this problem comes up. A person wants to go to the beach on Shabbos for the sake of mikvah. And it's at that time, it's possible that he goes to mikvah, water, it's that early in the morning and nobody's there, so the Halacha would say it's a harmless. You have to walk onto the beach itself, but not more than 4 steps. Of course, watch out for the waves coming in and taking them and making his clothes up, taking his clothes out to sea, having his land in Europe someplace. So you have to be careful to put it on something that's high, on a stand, a post or something that's within 4 steps of the water. It's high. It's a big problem which is never to solve these problems correctly, turn the business properly. It's never to Shabbos Kodesh, Shabbos Menucha, Shabbos Bavly, yes,
Shabbos. It is said that the person should be very careful when you come to shul, for example. Whether you visit on Shabbos, if you go to shul, you hang it in your coat. Be careful you hang it up properly so it doesn't fall on the floor. Because if it falls on the floor, it gets full of dust, dirt. If you're properly, you're ashamed to walk out with the coat that's so full of dust. And you are allowed to brush off that dust on Shabbos. We say that it is forbidden to brush off the dust if the coat, or jacket, or suit, is dark, in other words, black or navy blue. That's clearly dark. Then it is forbidden. It's permissible if the jacket or coat is light white or pastel shade, light color. You're allowed to brush it off only with your hand. You're not allowed to use a brush. The most important is that you're not allowed to take the jacket, rub it hard against itself to get that out. It's the same as using a keli, but definitely a posek in all conditions. So if it is a very old coat, old suit, then you're allowed to brush it off with your hand too. Because this is an unusual case. You should not be wearing a very old suit or coat on Shabbos. This is really when it's aged. In other words, the person is not that particular about it. If you don't anymore, as a person particular, it's affecting your keli. Assuming your keli, and you're not allowed to brush off the suit, even when it's dead, if it is dark or new. Okay. Dark and new. Now, if there are things on the coat of the jacket, not dust into the material itself, but feathers that blow on, particles that can be taken off with your fingers, and you're allowed to take it off with any kind of garment. Even that which is dark color and which is not. These are the things of cleaning garments. Of course, they should be very carefully guided by it, and not a person to forget easily. This the best thing is to be careful, watch yourself, not to let it hurt you anymore. This is what the Gemara said that Halacha, not just to how big guy, Halacha wears a piece of dust, dirt, status on the garment is 5 pieces. So, of course, we have to first to fill up this. Also, you see where it fits here too. From the Halacha, when it knows how to learn, it should know that if there's a stain on his garment, or Shabbos, you're allowed to do something which is Shabbos. have its own rules. So it should not be found to stay. Be careful to wash your clothes on Shabbos. Wash them against before you dust them. Second big item is that you're allowed to fold clothes. You're allowed to fold thing which has creases. You don't want it to lose its crease. You want to become generally a general crease. You're allowed to fold. For example, talus. The person has a talus. Every week you put the talus back in its own creases and its own folds. It fits perfectly. Now it looks neat. If you just crumple it, put it down and crumple it, you've got very much crease and not as nice an appearance. Are you allowed to fold a talus on Shabbos? The answer is that you are not able to fold it if you certain things that are permissible. You're allowed to fold talus only, talus or a beggar. Could be folded on Shabbos. But there are five halachas. One, it must be only if it is intended to be used again that day on Shabbos. A talus that you wear in the morning has no intention of doing it in the afternoon. Shabbos, that excludes the talus immediately. On the other argument, if you intend to wear it that same day, then you're allowed to fold it on its own creases, but that's only the first requirement. Second rule is that it must be folded by one person only. It's a long tablecloth, let's say, or here, which is very long, requires two people, that is forbidden. Third, it must be something which is new, brand new, or close to brand new. It's already worn and old, it cannot be folded. Fourth, it must be only white, dark color. Fifth, it must be the only beggar he has. He doesn't have a different one to change. Doesn't have a second suit. Then, if these five requirements are fulfilled, then he's allowed to fold an item on its wrist. So therefore, it stands understood that the talus will not be folded on Shabbos. Of course, talus is not going to wear again later. The talus cannot be folded on Shabbos. But the question is, what if a person folds it, keep it fairly neat, but not on the same creases? Talus has certain creases, or the garment has certain creases, and fold it over nicely, but not on the same creases, on different creases. You're not maintaining the same creases, but you're also not letting it become crooked up. You're allowed to fold, let's say, the talus thing, to be sure. You're allowed to fold the talus into different creases, not on the same one. And at night, you take it to be folded on its own creases. Is that permissible? It then says that if it is permissible, you're allowed to do it if it's not on its own creases. The Chabad says that, the Aharon say, but the Chayyadim says that it's permissible only if you intend to wear it that same day. Even if the other four requirements are not there, only if you intend to wear it the same day, again, then you're allowed to fold it on different cases, which of course is a rare case. The person's suit that he's going to take off temporarily, but only getting might go through. But not in the case of the talus. You have to wear a talus the same day. However, the Nachsa Shekel, brought by the Aharon, says that it is good, much better for the person not to fold the talus on different cases either. Much better for the person not to follow that. If you're one who does, one who doesn't, one who's back there in mitzvahs, will not fold a beggar even on different cases. Only time that you may fold it on different cases is if you borrow somebody else's talus. You want to show you how to fold it. You found it wasn't. Instead, it's folded nicely and taken you and kind of crumpled up. That's not fair. There you should rely on this type of folding it on different cases. To get borrowed of their own, that because it should not fold it even on different cases. And the rule of one of those cleaning one's shoes. A person who walks in blood into the house and he wants to scrape the blood off the shoes. What makes them dirt? Never which gets onto his shoes. You want to scrape it off, so you're not allowed to scrape it off on the sidewalk. ground, any ground. That is the thing. You are allowed to scrape it across strictly. There is a hole in the ground. Digging holes is serious. You're going to do it on a wall. It's either just perpendicular, say you may scrape off pressure should up, or even how to do it in the shop and see the house and places on the ground. That will grade it in the previous shoes. That will show you the custom. But you are allowed to make a edge like the stairs. And put the stairs. Into the stairs, you're allowed to scrape the shoes off there. At least there is an outlet, there is a means of solving this problem. Of course, again, a person should try. This is not talking about at that level. A person should try to see to look that there should be no dirt or dust or anything touching yourself in it. Keep yourself clean and pure on Shabbos Kodesh. You should never be the king of Peinim Hashem. The list of Shabbos. It is properly conceding because of the Shabbos. Otherwise, we ask Hashem to do that.
By Shabbos, when washing dishes, there are some people who leave the dishes lie to dry by themselves. There are some women who are smart tell their husbands to dry it. On Shabbos, the dish is very wet, it's dripping. You use a cloth to dry it, then it will bring it down to a point where the cloth will become saturated. But this could cause speaker by pressure in a saturated cloth, and of course speaker by squeezing out the cloth. That's a halacha d'oraisa, it's legal. So when drying dishes, cups, it is forbidden to dry the dishes with a cloth, with a beged, because of the shaila of speaker. What then? Two things. One, you should shake off the water from the dishes. Two, it is permissible if they use a special cloth, a rag, considerably a rag, a cheap cloth, a dish towel, where there is no akpoda, it's not particular at all about the cleanliness of this towel, this rag. In other words, set aside a special rag for Shabbos and you want to dry the dishes, a rag that is worthless, when you care nothing about, this you can use because there's no shaila of sika. Even there, if the dish is very narrow, for example, you have a very narrow glass, you've got to use pressure to put the rag into the glass, there it is still usher even with this rag, because there's a certainty of sika. Now, if the water spills out on the table, water or another liquid that you can't drink, then, again, you must be careful about sika. You're going to put pressure on the tablecloth, on the table with this cloth, with the rag, you're going to cause speaker. So therefore, what to do is to lay a cloth on top of a napkin, tissue on top of this wet spot, and let it soak in by itself. And to use no pressure at all. Of course, if you're using tissues, paper napkins, there's no shayla at all about speaker whatsoever, about legal that is. You still cannot squeeze it out. You can't squeeze out the cheapest sponge, but there's no shayla. I'm not afraid of even the possibility, because if there is a possibility that it's not circulation, not necessarily when you squeeze it out, so it's much lighter. You're allowed to do it like a but not to put too much pressure on it. However, if the item that pours out of the table is not water but liquid, colored liquid, you must be very careful not to spread this to further spots, further parts of the tablecloth, because you are coloring. You must be very careful to contain it in its own place where it is and dry it from there. And in reference to jewelry, wearing of jewelry, we said for a man it is forbidden because tachshitim are not made for men. Women are allowed to wear tachshitim, though there is a special simon in Shulchan which deals with the issue of jewelry for women, because women like to show off, and they want to show their jewelry, so the middle of the street will have to take it off, show it to someone. Therefore, it will be also to wear any of that kind of jewelry, especially the expensive kind, which they'd be very anxious to show off. Nowadays, the Din says, the Talmud brings a law that because of the fact that Muslim women are not reliable, that colors, they are wearing miniature braids, miniature minds, and they cannot be spoken to that easily. They will not listen. So better don't talk to a Rav Sikha let them rather do it b'shegeg, unknowingly, let them live their way of fantasy, and the fact too that today, because of its severe competition, every woman practically has jewelry. They don't need to show off anymore. They don't let remove it, the women need to show it off, because they're afraid they don't want to show the better one. So this will not occur, therefore we allow jewelry generally to be worn by women. But a man should not wear jewelry of any kind at all. And even those, some men who wear rings, we mentioned before, that they get asas wearing a ring on Shabbos. Even though it is a kashet, it is not made for men. It's flower, versus he was sufficient himself with tailor with mitzvahs, not with these mundane items like jewelry which are fit for other kinds of dacha. Even middle of the week, it's advisable for a man not to wear a ring. Living life activity. We should be zeichet to Yusha and Canada and enter the Shabbos as a Bavly, so you can just go take a makeup ring. Look at Shabbos in a coloring Syria, as we had refers to anything which just becomes colored. When wine spills out on a tablecloth, you spread out while you're coloring. Some will say that's only the Aharon. Real coloring is if you add the same color to something, you deepen the color. Make a red cloth and put wine on it, color it red. There's anything like color, that's considered the real Yisra and Tzviya. But even the Arizal got one of the Yisra is still there. The question is, how about Tzviya? Is it possible to color human flesh, human skin? In this case, doesn't look like us. For example, for a woman to use makeup on Shabbos, this is all agree that it is awesome. There are some, of course, like this, who say that it needs to be done. Considered awesome that is only to use makeup on Shabbos. And at least, all agree that it's awesome in the body. This is any kind of makeup, eyeshadow, or even powder. Powder, which is not any color, sort of a doughish material, which is considered asur because it does affect the color of the skin. But this is only because this is the nature, which means that that kind of color is used. The woman uses makeup for color. However, it is not the natural act. It's not intended that way, then it's permissible. For example, a person is allowed to eat civilians, say watermelon, or pomegranates, which are very deep color, though the stains get on his hands and his face, and this is particulation, it definitely will stain. Still, it is permissible because it's not that good a color. It's not customary, it's not normal to color, not for the sake of coloring. Therefore, it's permissible, since we say that human flesh is not definitely included in the minute Tzviya, it's not done for that purpose, so therefore it is permissible to have to. Still, if a person does need it, it doesn't mean that he's not safe. Because then he can be careful not to wipe his hands on the towel. There he can be wiping his hands and coloring the towel. First washes his hands and face off before he dries them. That's to commit the act of Tzviya to cook. As far as combing is concerned, combing of the hair is also, of course, the comb or brush will most probably pull out hairs. And if there are certain cases where these certain types of combs, thick-skin combs and so on, are permissible possibly, because perhaps if it's done right, will not pull out the hair. Tishkuny combs are not pull out the hair. Tishkuny hairs are not pull out the hair. Nowadays, all combs and all brushes will admittedly pull out one hair or more. One hair can be many hairs, but at least the person will find when the comb or brush, you won't find after the dog. That's the comb with very, very wide teeth. Then very likely you have no kinks or knots in the hair, which is very rare if the hair is thick. As a woman's hair, as a man's hair doesn't know necessity to comb, it's going to be fit for a man to use a comb to pull out. But then on Shabbos, if they have to wear it, that don't count. There should be that much hair in part of the man. course, there should be no problem either. It says to clean the shegel, or to clean the tichel that she used to come with it. In the case of ordinary women, where there's a lot of hair involved, usually the right tooth comes in the milk, so could, with the use of a finger, smooth down the hair. That is permissible. General to avoid a big picture of the shoulder before the time of using it. This combing or moving, one must be very careful to see that halachas of Shabbos are kept adhered to very strictly. Exerted to training mitzvahs, limits, mishmanis. And thereby see the good mishmanis that are with the Shabbos. Also, the Torah says that your Eved is not allowed to work either on Shabbos. A person has a slave, just like his animal is not allowed to work for him on Shabbos, so too is Eved. A person's Eved is like his animal. And the Eved, of course, means that Eved Kinani, who is a Goyish Eved, belongs to him permanently. This is a posek in the Torah, a posek in the Chassidus HaDibros, which shows that there is such a thing as the Eved itself. It says, it's about the Avodim. The Chod as Avodim, who they are, of course, are well known. The Yaakov were destined to become Avodim, which shouldn't be so. But if a person has an Eved like this of course, it's not doing today. A person has an Eved like this, he's not allowed to let him do any kind of work at all himself. Even for the Eved himself, there's a shadow to fall. The Eved himself has to rest. However, to what the dinim that are doing today, in general, a goy is allowed to work on Shabbos, has to work on Shabbos. Moshe says, if a goy the rest on Shabbos is chayv decent. A guy has to work on Shabbos. Is it permissible to tell a guy to do work for you? Then we have a Didid Abonon. Didid Abonon is a shvus. One of the guys that you're not allowed to tell a guy to do any work for you. Even a shvus to shvus, which means the Halacha, which itself would be considered Didid Abonon. Tell a guy to do Melacha Abonon also is lesson. But there is an exception by the shvus and Melacha Mitzvah. There's a special mitzvah involved. Putting it on a light, which itself is a shiloh, when it's used in Aharon, putting it on in shul for the sake of an olam, need it, the mitzvah, there are cases, specific cases where you're allowed to do it, you're allowed to tell a guy, the shvus and Melacha Mitzvah. However, this is a case of a wumad, which means a Jew who thinks he's converted, the Jew cannot convert, but he thinks he's converted, he became a guy, which includes, of course, every Jew who's Mechal Shabbos. On his own, he's going to keep Mechal Shabbos. You're not allowed to tell this Jew to do anything for you on Shabbos. Not only that, you can't even tell him, when you're allowed to tell a guy, you can't even tell this Jew who still is a Jew. Yisrael, Shechota Yisrael. Still carries the type of Jew. And though he himself would do it, would do the Aveda, but you're not allowed to tell him because that's the Aveda. We're going to say to mislead him. Mislead means that he thinks that you tell him it's permissible, even though he does it himself. So it's a bit to tell a Mumar at any time to do something on Shabbos, even though you're allowed to tell him God. Which is exactly to the Shulchan, Shabbat, Papas, Mona Shleima, this kiruv, which I'm saying is with the Shabbos, is you're not allowed to ride in a wagon on Shabbos that's pulled by animals, horses, or to ride a horse itself, for two reasons. One, you're not allowed to use an animal on Shabbos. The use of an animal on Shabbos is forbidden. Secondly, to ride a horse, there is the Zeda. Zeda is a chum that you might break off a branch from a tree and use it to whip the horse. Therefore, it is forbidden too. So in case you're riding in a coach that is driven by a guy, where there's no problem about your whipping the horse, there's no Zeda at all, you're still having an awe of the use of an animal, which is awesome. And this brings up, of course, the question that people should think about and ponder. How is it possible today for any Jew, any religious Jew, any Shemesh Shabbos today, to own a dog? It's a big question, very big question. It's a very difficult one to answer. You have to be Daman Kavskus. Jews who say that the dog becomes invisible on Shabbos. A dog is an animal that is muktzah. You cannot touch the dog or hold the leash of the dog, lead the dog by the leash. The leash is held upwards. You take the dog out into the street, presumably that the dog will not wait till after Shabbos to do its natural tendencies. And the chalal, not to make any physical contact with the dog, is 24 hours or more, seems impossible. In any event, even if a person was that strict with the din, it's difficult not to forget and inadvertently touch the dog. Or the dog jumps on a person, so that it seems impossible for a religious Jew to own a dog and have this dog held in the house, kept in the house on Shabbos. Since the dog is muktzah, there's no logical way that a person can really observe this din with this kind of animal. And that is why, an additional reason why a good Jewish home should not have a dog in it. The question of on Shabbos, if you're allowed to pay the Rav or the Chazan, but the dude is charged only on Shabbos. You hire a Chazan to daven, or some shuls that have a higher Chazanim, we get ours free, of course, and that is good. There are some who actually pay the privilege of listening to the Chazan for long davening. And this Chazan is paid his wages, his salary is paid for services that are done only on Shabbos. Like a Shabbos which he gets paid. The question is, how can a person work on Shabbos and earn money on Shabbos alone? So it says that it is best if a person, a Chazan, was hired to daven on Shabbos and on the weekdays together. Combined, it is permissible. However, what about a Baltikeya? There are some Baltikeyas who only get paid on Rosh Hashanah. This is only that you can't hire him to blow shofar on Sukkot or Pesach too. Then it says that in the case of a Chazan or a Baltikeya, or even, let's say, a Rav, it's a mitzvah. This is an item which is a mitzvah, and this is considered a shvus to shvus, and therefore it is permissible. The Shari Tshuva says the best solution is, the Eitz all the days, is to take on this Rav or the Chazan for nothing, no pay at all, as is common in many places, and then you give him a gift afterwards. So the salary is in the form of a gift, not as Schar Shabbos. There's no law, you can't make it for Shabbos on the weekdays, then you make it in the form of a free service, and give the Chazan a gift, and of course he goes on a strike for a raise of gifts. But this way it is permissible for so-called Schar Shabbos. We should be zochet to the real Schar Shabbos. Shabbos Osad Lovay. Zochet to the Schar of Mabot, the Yamedu. In our time we should see this. Kiruv Shekol Shabbos, when you tell me Mashiach Kedem Heya, the Yamedu. Chilchei Shabbos. It is that any type of discussion, even words, let alone action, Halacha and Nosson, but there's also an idea of speaking on Shabbos, only words of Kedusha, the words of Chayil are Nosson. Because we're able to talk words of business, not to do business, but to actually transact, to speak words of business is Nosson. The reason is, actual Isra Rabbanim, because the reason is Zayda, that he might write it down. He might forget and write it down, breaks the major Halacha. Therefore, Racham Gezer that any kind of words of business, matnas Asa, on Shabbos. And this is included when we say Shamnu Vagadnu, we say it daily, we say it in Yom Kippur, the Teshuva, the Barnu Daifi, that we spoke, and then so this includes the Barnu Divrei Masa or Maton B'Shabbos V'Yinta, the person dared to speak words of business on Shabbos V'Yinta. It's only those words that are permissible to speak on Shabbos, this different days of Shabbos, that is mutter. Now, for example, you have cases where they sell the aliyahs. Aliyahs are auctioned off. You have that on Yom Kippur. For Yom Kippur, they auction the aliyahs off. You have it on Sukkot Torah. And in some shuls they have it every Shabbos. They auction it the maftir, so they certainly do that. So the shaila is that auctioning is actually doing business. The Marshal says that selling the aliyahs, auctioning them, is comparable to Masar Matan, and therefore it is also. But since it is done, Marshal says that how wonderful is the bidding of those in this city that when they go for auctions on Shabbos or Yontif, let's say one person gives $5, second office 10, third office 15, the final bid is 20 wins, the other three pay off their bid also. Each one pays the amount that he bid because it was like a neder for tzedakah. If they don't pay it, then it means that it's pure business. They don't pay it, then it becomes permissible. The bidding Elam is, though, as is obvious, bidding Elam is that they make you in this item, since the entire thing is for the sake of mitzvah, and where there is a need of mitzvah, this is a shvus, look at mitzvah, and that's why it is permissible to do this. If possible, of course, a person who offers a bid and then gives the amount they offered to tzedakah, even though he did not win the auction itself, then eventually he's investing his money in a very good cause. Giving money for tzedakah follows an excellent item. Now, at the aliyah, sometimes the person says that he's menadeg, he contributes to tzedakah, shul, a certain amount of money. That is permissible. You're allowed to make an appeal for money, and then people can pledge money, and a person should say, of course, to give money itself, it's tzedakah. You cannot say he's offering to give a certain item, like one of the makdish or sefer Torah. He offers to give a sefer Torah, because that means he's making it hektish. That is only if he says sefer Torah zu. He has to say that this sefer Torah I give to the shul, the makdish this to the shul, and makdish on Shabbos is awesome. But to say stam, read a sefer Torah to the shul, shiva, that is permissible. But it's most important, it's most vital for everyone to know that most shuls, very sadly, tragically, they are unaware of a major issue. It is forbidden for a person to say that he gives a neder. A neder, even for a mitzvah, is also. So when a person, Shabbos next to Misha Beda, Ba'avur Shenodai, or on Yom Kippur, or at the time when he says Yisker, the person himself says, Yisker Lekim, Avur She'ani Neder, B'tzedakah, make neder b'tzedakah, that is also. What a person should say is Ba'avur She'ani Etein Tzedakah B'li Neder. That's the correct way. The Shabbos next, you should say Ba'avur She'yitain B'li Neder, $11 tzedakah, whatever money he's giving. You should say Ba'avur She'yitain, not She'neder, She'yitain B'li Neder. This is the proper way. A person should be very cautious. It's really so to avoid falling into this issue when the Gemara says it's like building a bono to have his letter Chadashah. Not to make any kind of neder. Of course, Rabbi Nachman, if you recall, used to make a Gedolim, and Rosenfeld asked him about this Gemara, which says, don't make a Gedolim. And he said that this applies to Shlomo Zalmakis. Characters who don't know what making a neder is and how to keep it, and then this goes. In the days he loses, the Gemara says, it's good for those who are the emes, tzadikim, who easy. But for ordinary people, meditative, low power, they must be careful never to say the word neder for anything. Say the Moshe Feinstein, to lead neder even when they are continuing to stuff. The mitzvah is not the Mishleim, the mitzvah Shabbos Mishleim is succeeding in Mishleim. I have to see all these things. We want to complete a little more about Shabbos. So today's year is Simple Shabbos. The last thing we discussed was the Yisur of Masel Matan. These people of the Shabbos. Shabbos, the Gemara says, Shabbos, the words to speak on Shabbos are nothing the same as the words to speak in weekdays. Riyah Kodesh, Noyeg, and he spoke only Lashon Kodesh on Shabbos. Anything had to say Lashon Kodesh. Aside from the fact there was no Rosenfeld that was spoken by Arizal, and even the Simchas Chulin, too, whatever was necessary, This is the Lashon Kodesh. These are lived in Israel, the language of Lashon Kodesh, but in many cases, of course, the language then was Arabic. Many Syrians, many Israelis, Israelis of the Middle East, they spoke the hundreds of Arabic. Not the Israelis of Zion, Egypt, so language was Arabic. Arizal was also in Damascus, so it was very popular site. Still, on Shabbos, there had to be a difference, a separation between the words of Shabbos and the words of other days. Besides the fact that there was nothing essentially declared, but the words themselves have a high illusion. So, therefore, there was a difference, but wow. The reason, of course, is that Maso Maton, business is also on Shabbos. Why are words of business also? That's what we said. We're afraid that tonight might bring to writing on Shabbos, which already is a Halacha D'Oraisa. Today is a Chum. Now, measuring also, take God's big, measure anything, measure could be, of course, length, or area, space, or could be measuring weight. Measuring on Shabbos and also to weigh things and measure things, except where it is for the sake of a mitzvah. For example, you have to have the item of food. You happen to have some kind of an Isur, something from kosher fell into a pot of Shabbos food, that's for sure. You want to know if this food is kosher. In order to determine its kashrus, whenever there is Isur, in certain cases, requires the majority of kosher. In some cases require 60 times as much. In order to know, you have to measure, weigh, and so forth. This kind of measuring is permissible. By mitzvah, you need it for the food for Shabbos. You're allowed to measure that for Shabbos. Same thing too, you have to know about mikveh. Mikveh is kosher only if it has 40 saw. 40 saw is a certain measurement. So it's 6 cavity, so forth. This 40 saw is the minimum amount required to make that, and we had that very solidly. But very solid. But in order to be kosher, it's very big difference in kosher or not. A woman is coming to follow, so she goes to mikveh. Because mikveh, there's a suffix where there's 40 saw laying in it, so how to measure that for Shabbos. Mitzvah. Same thing. There's also a mitzvah in helping a sick person. So to take the person's temperature. And with a thermometer, the person is sick, or a person is suspected of being sick, it's permissible to take the temperature on Shabbos. That's called the Ida Shel Mitzvah. No question about that. And, of course, the question is, what about the fact that a sick person, when you cannot help a sick person, in any case, medicine, aspirin, drugs, any other type of medication is also on Shabbos. What there is, you should keep us on a month. You're not allowed to give any kind of medicine or on Shabbos unless it's seriously ill, unless it's danger, matter of life and death. Otherwise, there's no necessity. Otherwise, you're not allowed to use any medicine on Shabbos. In fact, it's not a mitzvah. The answer is that it's true. There is a Zayda, or Shtika, which is the nicer. This is the nicer. And the Zayda, the Aharon Zayda, only by items of food. Only was a matter of master, or Mishta, only drink. Measuring thermometer, we are not afraid to be making the thermometer. Not sales of salt or tapping on it and eating. There's no question that master Mishta, thermometer, for the sake of the toilet, definitely looked at. Now, the beginning of not allowed to speak about business. How about if you don't speak about something? How about if you think about it? The person in Shabbos is allowed to think about his business. Business matter, he's not doing anything, he's not speaking anything, so what's wrong? The Gemara says, Ibor Asur, Irhor Mutter. Ibor is forbidden to speak. Thought is permissible. But in time, though, this was as far as Shabbos is concerned. you do find there are certain items where thought itself is sin in the thinking alone. Including thought of a sin is worse than a sin sometimes. In this case, the thought itself is permissible, but let's say, wow. After that, this heter, it says, Sheshishem Bas Halacha, Sisa Kol Malachta, 6 days, you're working, do all your work, complete all your work. I'm not asking if it's possible for a person to complete all the work in 6 days before there's something left over. Always mean has to be complete. The answer is that when Shabbos comes, you must consider all your work as having complete. There's not one trace of any kind of work left for you to do. Shabbos comes, everything is completed, done, finished, and now it starts with Shabbos Brucha and nothing else. We're going to think about this is the meaning you've left something undone. You're not fulfilled the mitzvah of the Asisa Kol Lachta. That's the mitzvah in the Asisa. Therefore, that too should be considered asur, or it is not the mitzvah, though there is a head there, should be put it, not the mishnah's asur. Not what a Jew, a good Jew should avoid any thoughts of business whatsoever. There is one item which is permissible, in Shabbos. The Chilul Shabbos which is permissible for the sake of the mitzvah is so important that the Chachamim allowed this to a person wants to buy a house. Buy a house is a mitzvah or is it a sin? The person has to live. He has to have a place to live. And the place to live requires a home. He has a choice of renting a house or buying one. So it is very clear that buying a house in Chutzlaretz, a person who lives outside of Eretz and buys a house, that person is committing a wrong. We don't want to condemn thousands and thousands of Jews who buy homes here in these neighborhoods, in Brooklyn, Jersey, there's a section in Catalonia, places where the wealthier elite purchase expensive residences and homes, villas and so on. However, even if a person is very wealthy, at least he should try to avoid buying a home. The Gemara says the Tikuney lived in tents. They were wealthy, they lived in tents. Why? Because they were good. They were outside of Israel. They said, as long as we are in Golis, we want to be prepared at a moment's notice to shed what we have to move to Israel. Now, if a person who buys a house here usually says, okay, if Mashiach comes, I will forfeit the house. I'm going to make a grand sacrifice, leave the house over, and go as you go. However, it's easier said than done. The fact that if the person really expected Mashiach, he wouldn't establish such solid roots in Chutzlaretz. You're ready to move, you don't buy a home and furnish it so well. You rent the house, and let the landlord worry about it when Mashiach comes. You move on to Israel where you have a nachla, you have an inheritance. Therefore, it is inadvisable for a person to buy a home in Chutzlaretz, even if he is a full-time millionaire. Rent the nicest one. Just have your transport ready. The car with the motor warmed up, and the car headed direction of the airport. You get your cloud going to Wellington itself. However, he says that the person buying a house in Israel, there is a mitzvah. Purchase of the land in Israel, to buy it from a recipient plus one good. Not that the good, give it to the good, that is a mitzvah. That's a mitzvah to save the land, give it back to the good. Surely it is Esau to give any land, an inch of land in Israel, to give it to the Goyim. The Arabs are not sure that they don't give see one single inch of land. West Bank, East Bank, Tigers Bank, anyone part of land there. No matter where it is, if it's in Israel, that is finished, belongs to the Am Yisrael and Israel. Therefore, the saving of it, which means languages, is owned by an Arab. A Jew has a chance to buy this home to an Arab. To buy a home to an Arab this mitzvah is so big that you can actually do this, make this purchase on Shabbos. Buy Masul Matan on Shabbos? Yes. But how can you have Masul Matan? How can you buy a house? Who's going to buy a house without a contract written up? A house requires a contract. It requires writing. And it says, mitzvah of buying a house, and it's so big. The Aharon said, go, man, go. Let them write on Shabbos too. Mitzvah to buy a house, allowed to have the goy write on Shabbos. The shvus is not the mitzvah. The Aharon themselves, Asid, holding the Masul Matan, they themselves are Pesha, Osad or Pesha. They said it is permissible for the sake of the mitzvah. So gigantic a mitzvah to save the land of Eretz Yisrael for the Jews, redeem it, get it back. The Aharon allowed such steps. Masul Matan, purchasing a home in Eretz Yisrael, and writing it. This was in those days. It then applies today too. Today too, a person, any capital want to buy a house from the Arabs. They have a contract written on Shabbos today. Kiddush, back if they had, don't know the children. This was left in the children too. Figure is which was effort to fulfill these, of course, go together, Shabbos, Kiddush, and Teshuva, these are all in religious levels and Kedusha, which was effort to kind mitzvahs, Shabbos, which are very complex. Guam, the effort to the Yom Shapul Shabbos, Yom Albias and Mashiach, we will have back our land, Eretz Yisrael, permanently, ever afterwards, affect permanently all the illegal settlers, all the banks of Eretz Yisrael will take over the Jordanian bank, Bank of Jordan, which was taken during the 67 war, and get back to one of those moral Islam things that you kept leaders. Of course, we will then have the leaders will have the Mashiach kiruv, only we hope to see now. Else it should be now. I one thing more. We are on Ilchei Shabbos. Dinim of Shabbos that deal with the items that are forbidden to discuss, to speak about in Shabbos. Isur of Dibur on Shabbos should shayach to the pet or mouth. Same time when you want to speak about the mouth, in other respect, what is forbidden to go into the mouth for Pesach. Things that are unkosher. The Gemara says there are things that are fed. The mouth, which is the malchus, of course, has two kinds of isurim. That which goes in, that which comes out. The food that you take, and the output, for those who know, not the output of words, but also Torah and so forth. Now, since we are very close to Pesach, just a brief discussion of those items that you have to purchase. Must buy for Pesach. Above all, make sure that you buy things that are kosher to Pesach, not because of the brand name, not because of the fancy prices, which are effectively a crime in itself, that these companies dare to overcharge so much. You must be very careful about buying foods that are, as much as there is an importance in kashrus, there also is an importance in the kedusha of the money. Jewish money is very important, very holy. Torah is didactic and makpid on the value of Jewish money, so that it should not be wasted unnecessarily. If you can buy kosher food that does not have the stamp of approval of the certain ones who stamp itself is a messy one, put old stamps on it, make the food dirty with their stamps, then you should see to it to buy food that costs less than is just as kosher. Now, for example, you have certain juices. With one brand name, it runs much higher than the second brand name. You can buy the standard brands at cheaper prices, buy them, by all means. Certain items, of course, unpacked, uncanned items, that you have to know certain halachas. to go a quick rundown, try to cover it clear possibly tomorrow. The items that are forbidden on Pesach. The vegetables that cannot be eaten on Pesach are asparagus, beans, broccoli, barley. This is cauliflower, mustard, mushrooms, garlic, peas. Without this great day, guarantee, cover it with rice. Rice, of course, is medicinal for the sweat. Beer, various types of spices, peanuts, dried fruit that we use for it. Even raisins would be delicatessen, of course, including the spices. The orange rind, the rind of an orange, that's not to be used at all. So we use that to mix into food, cook, bake. And as far as children are concerned, if it's Mexican Maltos, there's a Shiloh. Pepper too, Shiloh. Shiloh, so he's got to get rid of it. It's definitely a connection. Galox. Is that important? Is that important because it has a little hydroxide, but you should get a substitute. You get that from big laboratories. The vast majority of cough medicines are good. Sucralose, which is banned by the government because it's too close to Pesach. Most tranquilizers cannot be eaten on Pesach. The best tranquilizer was a black banana. Puts you to sleep the fastest. Ascorbic acid. One of the fakes that they use for vitamin C. Denatol, some people denatol too is a life matter because it's an anti-spasmodic. And you could get something to treat a lot of things. Most sugar-coated tablets and cosmetics, most of them may be permissible for women. But you tell women to check it out. They think she has a shin. They look better without cosmetics. Why take chances with it? Why spend extra money for items like that on Pesach where the prices are exorbitant? Especially for even toothpaste. Toothpaste is one of the items that's good on Pesach. Even here we have the good tasteful, good character. Put out toothpaste on Pesach that is kosher, but in an unfair sense. Because you cannot use toothpaste on the first days of Yom Tov and the last days of Yom Tov. You have it only on Chol Moed. Sometimes Chol Moed comes out on Shabbos, like this year. So you have 2 or 3 days the most you can use toothpaste. For this, I'll do you a favor and sell you kosher Pesach toothpaste in super family economy size. That's good for until next Pesach. Expect you to like them and buy their products during the year. Of course, it's very unfair. They should sell a 10-cent size, with the brush size, and that's it. But they don't. And that's why the best thing is to substitute for toothpaste to be used bicarbonate of soda, which is kosher for Pesach, and which could be also be used, if necessary, instead of Melox. So you have that as a substitute for both toothpaste and Melox. All good bicarbonate of soda. These are some of the items that are also on Pesach. We'll take up those that are mutter in Shulchan. Spices. Which of course is also. Now you'll find a lot of these items mentioned with Hechsheder. a very clear label on the package saying kosher to Pesach. If you have that label, it's 100% kosher to eat the label. The which will take up the rest of this, which is relative to the mahadeh, not machmir over the chumras, because chumras yisedas are also part of a klipa. Mahadeh the mitzvah, do the mitzvah right. Zechet the nishma, the mashma shel chametz. If I zechet the Yerushalmi paid off. Again, we pause with Hilchos Pesach for a moment, and we go Hilchos Shabbos for a moment. We go to Hilchos Pesach. We spoke before about those items that are forbidden on Pesach, types of vegetables, other items, medication, and we come to those that are permissible. In other words, we get the good news there. All kinds of fruits are allowed. There's no fruit that is usher for Pesach, except that fruit should be simply rinsed off, washed off, because sometimes they have a powdered substance on them. Keep them fresh, it must be washed off. Otherwise, fruit are all kosher. Beets, cabbage, carrots, cucumbers, celery, eggplant, green peppers. Green peppers is not the pepper that's used. Powdered pepper that's used for cooking, for eating. Green pepper is a regular vegetable. This is permissible, whereas we said regular pepper is a spice, which is questionable. Onions, radishes, rhubarb. Rhubarb means to put the rubble. Lemon, which of course is a fruit, but it's a special kind of fruit, therefore it's mentioned specifically. Lettuce, actually there are some who use lettuce for butter, but it's a big shaila, whether it is permissible for butter. That's a separate topic we'll have later on. Squash, spinach, that's those children go bad, and Pesach, scallions, all kinds of melons, tomatoes, and turnips. These are the vegetables that are permissible. Now, the medications that are permissible only if they are brand new boxes, containers. Any medication was opened before Pesach, it cannot be used on Pesach. So there's no way to be sure of the fact that drop of chametz has not fallen in inadvertently. So, like hot soda is kosher if it's a new box. Also, this can be used as toothpaste. To substitute for toothpaste, save bother expense of buying the larger cannabis size for Pesach. Milk of magnesia, mineral oil, Epsom salt, aspirin, specifically Bayer's aspirin, which is purer than others. They came off the rabbis to say this. But the fact that Bayer aspirin, for whatever reason, has a certain superiority over others as far as purity goes, and therefore, if the person is going to use aspirin, preferably Bayer's, till others can prove themselves. Saccharin is permissible. Oronase, of course, is that oral medication for diabetics. There, it would be kosher. There are some people who are that desperate that it would be kosher, even if it wasn't that pure, basically. Oronase is clear of any type of chametz, like zebra. As far as tablecloths are concerned, plastic cloths, there was a shaila on plastic at one time. It was resolved that plastic cloths are kosher only if they are brand new. New cloths, then they can be used. Or brand new, of course, it could be plastic cloths that were used from last Pesach, and were set aside during the Pesach. Those cloths are permissible. Regular tablecloths could be used only with a cover over them. Because those items that came in direct contact with food, those who know, textiles are woven. You have the warp and the woof, the chassis, the end, the weave going both ways, and in between, look in the microscope, you find that there are little tiny holes go into the holes between the sleeve. Food that's on the table, it's brushed off, can be brushed into these holes, they become a fixture. Sort of give a better texture to the cloth. It fills in the holes and the cloth feels much smoother. Only because it has chametz in it. So no matter how much you wash it, of course you get out everything but. You might have a tiny fraction of an iota, and Pesach has no limit to the size and shear of chametz. So therefore, these cloths that are washed out very solidly could be used, but it doesn't have a cover on top of it. You have to have another cloth on top, either a new tablecloth, a regular cloth, or a new plastic cloth. Not to use the chametz-taking cloths for Pesach, uncovered. These are the items that cover practically most of the fields. We'll have more or less at the regular shiurim on Shabbos. The rest of the week we'll go back to Hilchos Shabbos. Starting next week, we'll take Hilchos Pesach straight forward. Continuing Hilchos Shabbos. Discussing the items of Shabbos that are forbidden, which are esteemed rabbanan. We have been talking, saying words that are forbidden, telling a guy to do malachos. Items that are also because of the zayda to avoid a more strict issue, severe issue that I said. And this says, the Gemara tells us that if Chas Shalom in those days this took place, of course, nowadays, we've seen it now at time too, but it's not by our generation also, to be honest. The Gemara says that if the Goyim came and took captive a person's daughter, Chas Shalom, in order to convert her, Crusaders came to convert her, Chas Shalom, to their religion, then the person is allowed to go outside of the boundary of the city to pursue this band, to attempt to rescue his daughter. Going outside of the city is an issue of one. But the converting is Chas Shalom a major issue. Where it says that the person should commit a small sin in order to save the Jew from committing a major sin. This may be done. This is only, of course, if they are coercing her, or forcing her to convert. If one has a daughter Chas Shalom left the parents' home, her own volition, join up with conversions. They have Rahman was not today, Jews, Shemay, Kadeshim, Biddies, and so on. He's not allowed to commit the tiniest sin in order to save those children that leave their own volition of Moshe. Now, this is because there's a major sin being committed. This committed, now the Klal Adin also says that if the Goyim want to force a Jew to commit a sin, major sin, you're not allowed to try to save him on Shabbos. You can call Shabbos to save him. So, it's going to differentiate between the two, show the difference, in that where the major sin is being committed just one time, you really want to make a Jew commit a major sin, just that one time, you let it go. Another Jew cannot allowed to commit a small sin. Okay, this which is cannot commit a small sin to save another Jew from a major sin. But if it's a question of all time, convert his daughters, something like that, there it's so major and sin. So repeated so many times, no matter a lifetime has shown, there he is allowed to commit a sin. Ordinarily, the Torah says that a person, the halacha is a person, one Jew cannot say, I'll save another Jew from being sin by doing a small sin. You cannot commit a sin that I wanted to save a second Jew from a sin that I said. You have no right any kind of an aveda, unless it is extenuating circumstances where I explain things that are a long series of sins that will be saved by this one single action. That too, a person must weigh very carefully. As it said, be very careful not to compare this to something else, to anywhere else. You must have a definite guidance before a person is actually told he may go out into a sin. Getting on a horse, riding a horse on a Shabbos, getting on a horse and going out pursuing his man to rescue the save the daughter, that is only